Good morning, and thanks for coming today. As Priscilla said, my name is Jerry Canavan. I'm a PhD candidate in the program in literature here at Duke, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Kim Stanley Robinson, whose talk is titled Science, Religion, Ideology. If there is an award for science fiction, I can assure you Kim Stanley Robinson has won it. The World Fantasy Award for his novella Black Air, the Locus Award for Best First Novel for The Wild Shore, the Nebula for Best Novella, The Line Geometer, the John W. Campbell Award for Best Science Fiction Novel for Pacific Edge, the British Science Fiction Association Award for Best Novel, and a Nebula Award for Red Mars, Hugo and Locus Awards for both Green and Blue Mars, Locus Awards for The Martians, and Years of Rising Salt. That's not even the full list, and leaves dozens of nominations unmentioned beside. But Stan's stature in the field of science fiction goes well beyond the usual source of accolades and distinctions. In a genre that is so often dominated by repetitive visions of dystopian surveillance states and inevitable robot apocalypses, Stan is among the proud few who still asserts that most utopian and that most science fictional of dreams, that another world is possible. But Stan's utopias are never easy and are always hard fought. For Stan, utopia is not some perfect static end state, but an ongoing praxis which may sometimes achieve victories, but is never victorious. I'm always struck by the lesson he sneaks in near the end of Years of Rising Salt, when he reminds us that while our individual lives and personal struggles are doomed to end in the tragedy of death, we can still find the possibility of comedy, of happy endings, in the long arc of history towards justice and collective life. In Pacific Edge, he's a bit more blunt about all this. He defines utopia with two simple, if brutal words: struggle forever. So we struggle. And in Stan's novels, it is science that lights the path. But like his relationship with utopia, Stan's relationship with science is never uncomplicated or naive. He is aware of the pitfalls, he knows about Frankenstein, and he's heard about the atom bomb. In his most recent novel, Galileo's Dream, which I understand is available for sale in the hallway, a novel that plucks Galileo from the 17th century to the moons of Jupiter 500 years from now, Stan describes the history of science and its sometimes co-optation by capital and the state this way. This is Stan. Science began as a poor Claire. Science was broke and so it got bought. Science was scared and so did what it was told. It designed the gun and gave the gun to power, and power then held the gun to science's head and told it to make some more. How smart was that? Now science is in the position of having to invent a secret disabler of guns, and then start the whole process over. It's not clear that it can work, because all scientists are Galileos, poor, scared, gun to our head. Power lies elsewhere. If we can shift that power, that's the if. If we can shift history into a new channel and avoid the nightmare centuries. If we can keep the promise of science, a promise hard to keep. Nearly every one of Stan's novels in different ways explores the possibility of this promise made fulfilled, of new and better political forms erupting out of the crucible of economic, ecological crisis through the long-awaited union of scientific thinking, reason, with empathetic feeling, love. Stan's dream, the dream shared by me and by so many others in the complicated quasi-utopia we call the university, is that someday the right-thinking, good-hearted people might actually be in charge. On days when the callow heartlessness and short-sighted stupidity of our political and economic institutions causes me to despair for the future, I worry that Stan may be our culture's last great citizen of utopia. But on my better days, and I think today is one of those, I still believe he is just the first. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Stanley Robinson.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Priscilla, for having me and organizing this conference. I want to talk today about science as an ideology, and I want to use the definition of ideology that is adapted out of Althusser, an imaginary relationship to a real situation. And I like this definition very much because it emphasizes both the imagination and the real as being equally present to us. And also, it's not a judgmental definition of ideology, since we use this word mostly as an insult, as in, you're being ideological, well, I am being correct. And so the word loses value in that sense. It also, if you think of ideology as an imaginary relationship to the real situation, you realize that it is a necessary attribute of the human mind. You need it. If you did not have an ideology, it would be a disability similar perhaps to autism or retardation. You have to have it. And As a person that's worn glasses all of my life, the metaphor that often comes to mind is that your ideology is like your glasses. It reforms what's coming in, it shapes it. It can have blank spots and blinders. You can sharpen it up, you can change its dynamics. An ideology is malleable. And also, it tends to be individual, although like many individual attributes, they fall into classes based on simply on our physiology. By this definition, you could say that all political views are ideology, but also religions as well. Religion is clearly an ideology. And then I want to assert through the rest of this talk that science also is an ideology, an imaginary relationship to the real situation. A little bit different from the rest, but not in basic kind different. I suppose that there is a first assumption that science is somehow discovered rather than invented, that it's a way of a value-neutral discovery of the real that we have come across in the 17th century and have gone on from there. But it's clearly imaginary also. It's a human construction invented by us, and it's a little bit different because of this reiterative process where you make a hypothesis about what the world is like and then test it and then look at the results of the test and then change your formulation and do that in a reiterative process that is communal and collective and keeps going on, so that the push or the metaphor that I use comes out of submarine detection, the sonar, the ping factor, that or bat's echolocation, that you send a signal out. And depending on what comes back, this alters what you do next, what you ask next. And in that continuous reiteration of question and answer, you have a particularly malleable ideology. And I also want to argue in the rest of this talk, try to make the case, and as Jerry has pointed out, so preempted me in a way or given away the game, science as a utopian project. That it began as a utopian project and has remained so ever since, an attempt to make a better world. And this is not always the view taken of science, because its origins and its life has been so completely wrapped up with capitalism itself. They began together. You could consider them to be perhaps some kind of conjoined twins, these Siamese twins that hate each other, or Hindu gods that are permanently at odds, or even just a DNA strand that is wrapped around each other forever, or some kind of completely imbricated and implicated co-leadership of the world, cultural dominance that are, I would say, so that science is not capitalism's research and development division or enabler, but a counterforce within it. And despite the fact that, as Galileo says, science was born with the gun to its head and has always been under orders to facilitate the rise and expansion of capital, the two of them in their increasing power together are what you might say semi-autonomous. And science has been the utopian thrust to alleviate suffering and make a better world.